Good to go,
Okay,
sir.
so let's go for it. So first thing first, I want to make sure everybody's seeing the presentation properly. Zach will be my note for that. Yeah, great. So we're
Looks
here
good.
to talk about the brain state of a peak performer. And as we've already talked about it, it's or you've seen in all the emails that went out, answering the whys and whats of peak brain performance. Now, basically, like I said, on our agenda today is getting to know a bit about the brain, getting to know a bit about peak performance, and then how they influence each other, how the brain influences peak performance, and vice versa. It actually works for people who do it intuitively. What we can actually do about it, how can we train ourselves, how can we train the brain, what is brain training, and eventually some conclusions and answering your questions. So just a tiny bit about myself before we start. I studied neuroscience, then I went on to learn biofeedback and neurofeedback to become a trainer. One of the side things about it that I go together with is the NLP training. Specifically, I'm a master trainer, so I can also coach NLP and give people the ability to teach NLP themselves. I'm an MBIT coach. MBIT starts from multiple brain integration techniques, and I've been doing formally from the first actual degree and instructional certification I got for the past 17 years. So that's a quick wrap about myself. And let's start getting to know about the brain. So like I said, first, I'm going to give you some knowledge. Probably some of those things you already know, but we're going to see how we take all those things together. So the basic thing about the brain, the basic unit is the neuron. I'm putting neurons because what we're seeing here, if any one of you have ever saw a neuron in his life, picture or anything, this is the basic thing that most of us know. There's the cell body, there's the axon, there's dendrites, there are synapses. Basically, that's how the thing works. Now, there are various types. This is like the very classic one that everybody gets to see and gets to know, but that's a very it's only one type of neuron out of many. The main thing about it is that neurons speak various languages. The basic language is chemical and electrical, but over that, there are several things we'll get to know about that neurons do, and that's what basically creates our brain. And that's the basic unit, which has things serving around it. Now, when we talk about the brain, there's a general division that we take. Now, it's very rough because the brain is broken down into much more areas in several types. There are 10-20 and 20-20 types of divisions. There's something that's called Brodmann areas. In any kind of area, there's Broca area, Wernicke area. I can talk about lots of areas in the brain. But basically, we're talking about two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and about basically 4 lobes. We have the frontal lobe, okay, which is the kind of the first one to adopt for us humans. And it has to do with all of the cognitive things that we know, what makes us human, basically our personality, our problem-solving abilities, complex thought, all of that is in the frontal lobe. Then we have the parietal lobe, which is basically the somatosensory lobe, mostly the sensations, but something with motor as well. We have the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is mainly the visual lobe, although there are some other things that we do there. Again, this is very broad, it's very general. And we have the temporal lobe, which has mainly auditory and language functions, and it has something to do with memory. And 2 other parts that are less discussed, especially when you talk about brain training, but they have to do with it as well, is the cerebellum and the brainstem. And today we're learning more about them generally. Okay, so there are things that we know that they do, like the brainstem is basically very instinctive, and the cerebellum has, among other things, to do with movement and with memory and communication. But we're learning more about those parts as we go in the field of neuroscience. So that's generally about neurons and the brains. Now, what makes brain training, and is important to know about the brain, is the next 3, is brainwaves, networks, activation patterns, and the fact that there is a thing that's called neuroplasticity, whether you've heard about it by now or not. So as we come to brainwaves, probably if you heard about it sometime before, You've heard about the delta, the theta, the alpha, the beta, and the gamma. As you can see in this table, I'm not going to go through everything here. You can take the time while I'm speaking to look at it, and if you want maybe to write something down. So basically, when we go to train the brain, and specifically to train the brain for peak performance, there are several things that we want to do. We want to enhance intuition, what we call other consciousness, which was otherly known as unconscious or subconscious. I prefer the term other conscious. This is part of NLP understanding. We want to teach it to relax, to learn, to be flexible, to perform in a specific mental state, and to be able to shift gears from one state to the other and move through those frequencies rather easily. Now, the lower frequencies, usually when we do brain training, we want to find some kind of a lowering yet balancing formation for them. The high frequency is just about the same. We don't need them all of the time or most of the time. And there is a specific band in the middle, somewhere between the high theta to the end of the low beta, which is where we probably want to enhance and regulate upwards for the brain to start to perform in an optimal way. So that's why it's important to understand these frequencies, to know that they exist. Not necessarily remember everything, of course, but to know that that's what we're aiming to. And when we're talking about activations and we're talking about the patterns, so research has shown when working with brain and looking at brains in high performance, in athletes, with musicians, and all those kind of things, with pilots, fighters, that there is a specific part of the brain, specific networks that work together that correlate to that state that we call peak performance, which we will define in a minute. And these are the things that we want to see. We want to see specific brain waves and specific ways of brain activity firing, neurons firing, which is why neurons is so important, in specific networks that correlate and work with each other. So if I talked before about the 10-20, which is one of the ways to code the brain, so we talk about the back of the brain, the whole back, where I said there's the parietal lobe, okay? So over there, and at the same time, only the midline in the front. Okay, so that's a place that we call the default mode network. Supposedly, it's the network that works when we're not doing anything else. Thing is that this is one of the networks, nowadays at least, as far as we know, that's most busy instead of being really kind of an idle default state. So if we're talking about activation patterns, this is a place we want to activate, and we want to make a proper synchronization between theta, alpha, and gamma in order to create a peak resting state. Now, a peak resting state, maybe obviously so and maybe not, is something very important in order to actually achieve eventually peak performance. When we know how to not perform, how to be, what some people, in meditation and other practices, just saying, just be, don't do anything special. That's exactly that. We're talking about brain science, getting to work properly in the default mode neighborhood. So that's one thing. Another thing is activating something that we call P4, which is the back of the brain and the right side. And that's the place where we want peak alpha peak. Okay, so the most alpha supposed to be at the back of our brain. And that's the place where we want to see how things work really optimally. And we're talking about eyes closed training, which might sound a bit counterintuitive when you're talking about peak performance, because usually you perform best when you're opening your eyes and you're seeing what you're doing. When it comes to training the ability to do so, our brain likes to do it with eyes closed because it shuts down all other information and allows for alpha to work. So when we're talking about brain training generally and what we want to achieve, we're talking about achieving these, for example, right? There are several other patterns that we want to achieve, but these are some of the patterns that we want to achieve in a proper way in order to use less energy, because the brain is very energy consuming, right? It consumes a lot of energy. So we want to do it in a proper way, using less energy to achieve more. And that works by quieting the unnecessary frequency bands in the unnecessary places for what we're trying to achieve. And there is a way to work with the brain to get to do that. So that's why it's very important as far as these specific things. Neuroplasticity is why it works. If we're talking about why would we do it and why is it important, that's because maybe some of you heard that the brain comes into life, evolves, and then you have a specific set of neurons, and from that point on, they die. Well, it used to be the belief. It's not the belief anymore. We already know that amongst the roughly 87 billion neurons that we've got, they do revive, they do die and born, and you can play with it. And not only can you play with adding or reducing neurons, you can do, and that's a very important thing, create more connections, which is much more important than how many neurons you actually have. Neurons and their amount is important, but more so is how many interneural connections you've got. Okay, so that's a bit about the brain. Of course, we can go much more into it, but what's really interesting, I believe, is what can we do about it? So we'll just go on from there. And if anybody has questions regarding the brain itself, of course, I'll be happy to answer later on. So let's talk about peak performance a bit. So you can define peak performance in several ways. One of the ways that I like to define peak performance is as functioning in such level where somebody, a person, effortlessly is able to effortlessly achieve maximum results while feeling relaxed, focused, confident, and able, up to the point of feeling oneness himself, the task at hand, while enjoying and engaging all the way through. So that's one way to define peak performance. A shorter yet very to the point way is just saying, is it switching from being in the zone, which we'll talk in a minute, to just casual states, everyday state, every other state? Consciously, it will. Okay, so these two things define what we in brain setting, in brain training, call peak performance. Because you could talk a lot about peak performance and about mindset, which is not exactly what we're talking here, although it has to do with it. But we want to take someone to be really peak performer. So that's what we want him to be able to do, and how we do it from the brain's perspective, right? So that's how we define it. Now, the zone. Some of you know when I talk about the zone, what I mean about the zone. For those who don't know exactly what's the zone or how it works, the zone basically means that you're in such a state where you're just flowing. Things just happen. You're not engaged in the way that you're thinking about it and doing it. Okay, again, it comes back to the being part of humanity, right? What the person is able to do by just being. Okay, an example for that, and it connects us to the open focus and hyper focus. An example for that with fighting pilots, like I said before, is one of the research groups that's been done. They've seen that when the peak, okay, the best fighting pilots, right? They found out that they don't really engage in the meaning that we usually think in doing things, in doing what they are doing. It's more like it just happens. They go in, they do what they need to do. It sort of just happens. They're in some kind of a place in their mind where their brains works in a specific way, their mind works in a specific way, and things just happen. Kind of like when we're driving a car. For us, it's like driving a car. You know it when you're driving a car and you're just on the road, you're not thinking, yeah, I'll shift the gear, I'll do this if you use manual, right? I'll do the blinking now, and then I'll look at the mirror. Things just happen automatically. You don't need to give all those orders to your brain. The brain already knows, right? And then you flow with driving. You can do other things, okay? Talk to your spouse or quiet the children at the back or anything else, and you can still drive safely and know what you're doing, to the point, maybe some of you experienced that you've been through, I don't know, maybe half a mile, and you don't even know how you did it. I mean, you took turns, you've stopped at the traffic lights, everything happened. Obviously, you're here, but you have no idea how it happened. So that's exactly being at the peak of your zone. Everything just happened. You didn't need to do anything. Okay, you were performing perfectly at that point. So that is the zone. That's what we're talking about. And we've seen in research that people can be there and be alert enough that if something happens, they snap back into it. And that's hyperfocus and open focus. Open focus is basically another way of saying staying in the zone. When you're in focus, but you're not hyper in it, it's not the only thing that you have on your mind and the only thing that you are doing. It's something that you're doing and you're there and you're in the moment and it happens, but you can do things around it and you're calm and yet focused and open to the surrounding. On the contrary, hyper-focus is when you're all in. All in, that's the only thing on your mind. And if we'll take the example of driving again, so we can say that while we're driving and we're an experienced driver, so it's very easy, we're just doing it, nothing special. And then comes the point where for some reason, we have a flat all of a sudden and the tire explodes, right? Or anything like that. And then we snap into full alertness, hopefully, right? If we know how to function, people that do know how to function in such constellations, snap into it, stop at the side, put on whatever they need, the vest, lights, calling to it, you perform. You're very hyper-focused, you know what you need to do, you're performing, you're taking care of the issue. Once it's resolved, you're back. Hopefully, again, depending how flexible you are, you're back to yourself. You can go on driving. Obviously, that is peak performance when you can do it easily. We know that a lot of people don't do it easily, right? They either stress out when such things happen or they don't release it. They can go with it for 2-3 days. The other day, you don't believe, I was on the road and then I had a flat tire and it exploded and they can't really release it. So the point about it being at the peak of these states is going in fast, going out fast, okay? And some people do it intuitively. They don't do brain training. They never did brain training. They just have things that they know how to do and they do it well to the point where if you ask them, how are you doing that? They'll say, I don't know. That's just what I do. So it works both ways. You can either learn through life to become a peak performer. And when we check your brain, we see what you're doing, or we can train your brain and then you can be more of a peak performer, right? Now, flexibility and creativity. Flexibility, obviously, like I said, between open focus and closed focus, right? So this is a very important thing. And creativity comes together because creativity gives us access or comes from access to our theta waves in the brain, which we've seen before. Now, being able to go into theta, the most maybe helpful thing that I can give you about it, right? If we're thinking about why is it important and all those explanations and all this data. So basically, when you're talking to someone and you want to tell them something, right? And you know it's on the tip of your tongue and you just can't get it out. It's stuck there, right? And you know it's important, but it doesn't come out. That's because you're locked in alpha and beta. Okay, that's what's happening actually in your brain. Okay, it's locked within two very performative, very performance-oriented frequencies. And then you walk away because you say, it's okay, I'll remember and then I'll call you back, right? We all probably experienced that once in our lives. And when you do that, your brain releases both alpha and beta. And that's why theta comes in. You're creative, you're intuitive, and it comes back. You didn't have to do anything. And then you can either call or let it go because you understand that it's already not so important. But that's the thing. Everything that we see in life, everything that we do, how we go into focus, how we go out to focus, how flexible we are, how creative we are, everything we do has an explanation in our brain, in the way our brain functions, which is why actual brain training can achieve that. And the great message about it is that you can do that. Everyone can do it. And that's one of the things that we'll see pretty soon. Now, how do they go together? What's the brain set of a peak performer, right? So first of all, we talked about it before a bit. When we talk about brain and performance, alpha wave dominance at specific sites, like I said, at the back of the brain, okay? That's something that the brain has to be able to achieve. Now, a bit of numbers that might be boring, but just so we know, okay, most people would start when if they're not already at that stage, they would probably start at around 10% of the time, being able to perform at about, let's say, 9.5 to 10 hertz at that state, right? The more you train, you'll be able to get up to 40 to 50% of the time while training, being at around 10, 10.2, which is an optimal alpha peak performance for quite an optimal time. Being able to keep that state for 40 or 50% of the training is a lot, okay? So that's alpha wave dominance at specific sites. You want to be able to do that. You want to be able to know how to snap into it and out of it willingly. And it's kind of interesting because you're saying, how will I get into alpha? Well, we'll get into that later on. Blood flow optimization helps when it comes to open focus and hyper focus, okay? So one of the things that the brain knows how to do and is trainable is how to optimize oxygenated blood flow into the frontal lobe. Okay, this is something that we can train. This is something that the brain can learn how to do. And that's something that the peak performer knows how to do, like we've seen before, whether it is driving, flying, or other things. When I say multilingual brain or show here, and that there's a multilingual brain, like I said, the brain talks chemically and it talks electrically, right? We know that there's hormones, which are communicators between our into the brain and with the body, right? So intra and inter. And we know that there's electricity, like, I don't know if you know or don't know a bit about electricity, but there's the 1 and the 0, okay? There's some threshold that once you go above it, neurons start to work, you go below it, they close off, okay? So it's called inhibition or excitation. And other than that, the brain has regional speech, okay? If you think about it, if I'll tell you now, you know, just for example, I want you to think about a camel sitting on a chair with a blue hat and smoking a hookah, okay? For example, I don't think any of you who engaged in what I just said saw words. You probably saw a camel and you probably saw a chair and everything else. So one of the things that the brain that performs knows how to do is immediately have an image, and the fuller the image, the better you perform, the better you're able to create the image in your mind, the better your brain performs. So that's a very important and strong language, which is easier to access because electrical and chemical is a bit harder to access. Imagining is a bit easier. You can train that, okay? Habitually breaking the habit is something that peak performers already do, and the brains of them knows how to do it. And you probably heard about puzzles. I'll talk about it in a minute as well. And a lot of people say, yeah, I know, I do Sudoku every day. Now, this literally helps, and there are researchers that see how much it helps. I can tell that I'm part of a research as a subject that has to do with those things in order to see how they really help the brain. But the important thing is that if you only do one thing all the time, habitually, it's no longer really challenging. And if it's not really challenging, then you're not achieving the same thing. In order to actually get the best of what you're doing, whatever it is you're engaging in, you want it to be challenging. So usually you should switch from one activity to the other, keep it challenging. So if you'll do Sudoku, let's say for 3 months, and then let it go for a year, then come back to it, probably it'll be more challenging and challenging again and again, because at some point your brain already knows, yeah, so these are the lines, this is the way it works, that's what I need to do, okay? So you want to break the habit. And this is, again, something that the brain knows how to do, and we can train, and peak performers and peak brains know how to do, and even tend to do it habitually. So they habitually break the habit. Now, size versus density is important because most people think and believe that size matters. Now, size basically does not matter. It depends how you look at the word size, okay? But basically, size does not matter, meaning that a bigger brain doesn't necessarily mean a more intellectual brain or a better functioning brain, okay? Density, which sometimes comes with size, but not always, is more important. So density comes from how many dendrites and how many connections, like I've mentioned before, we have in our brains. The more we do all those things that are written here, and I'll show you in a minute what the actual things are that we can do. The more we do that, and the more we do it the right way, the more connections between neurons we create. That makes a very dense brain neurology, and that in turn usually does correlate, although this is still also under research, but this correlates more to higher performance and even higher intellect and even higher IQ, okay? So when you're talking about that, size doesn't necessarily matter unless we're talking about the size of number of neurons and connections between them, which is more suitable to be called density. So that's up to now, I think it's more than enough information, right? Knowledge, data. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and dive straight into what we can do about it. So this is the point, like I said before, that if you want me to maybe, I don't know, speak slower so that you can understand better, or that you can write down better, you can just let me know, or anything else is that. If you want to take notes or get into your hyper focus that you can really learn the techniques, so now's the time to do it. So how do you do brain training at home? So first of all, and maybe the most easy thing, is breath work. The only thing you need to do is breathe. Now, I know breath works doesn't necessarily mean brain, but the thing is that when we breathe correctly, what we're doing is that we're influencing our hearts, which in turn influences our vagus nerve, which in turn influences our nervous system. Now, that helps creating habitual calmness and habitual focus. So the better you breathe, the better you use breathing, you can either do it, consecutively or when you need it, preferably both. The better you are. Now, what's proper breath work? There are tons of techniques. There are techniques from martial arts. There are techniques from yoga. Whoever heard about Wim Hof, there's techniques of Wim Hof. I mean, there's a lot of techniques. I'm talking about something rather easy to do, which is balanced breathing, okay? And that means you want to breathe in at about 5.5 or 6 seconds, inhaling through the nose, and you want to do the same thing, 5.5 or 6, depending what's more comfortable for you. And obviously, if you have something to count, because counting 5.5 seconds, I mean, if you can do that, chapeau. I know I can count 5.5. I can count 5, I can count 6. 5.5, peak performance or not, that's a bit of a tough one. So 5.5 with an app, or 6, you breathe in through the nose, out through the nose, and to your stomach. Okay, now obviously people ask, how do you breathe to your stomach? You can only breathe to your lungs. You are correct. You can only breathe to your lungs. All those breathe to your shoulder, breathe to your head, that's mental. But when I speak about breathing to your tummy, okay, to the stomach, I'm talking about expanding your stomach when you're taking in the air, when you're inhaling, and releasing the stomach, letting it go, deflate, okay, when you're exhaling. Now, what this allows, it allows the diaphragm to move fully. That extends your lung capacity. That helps you become a better breather, a better relaxer, a better focuser, and hence a better performer. And the more you do it habitually, the more you do breath work each and every day, the better your every day in between breath becomes. And then it's much more accessible and notable in your day-to-day life how you perform. And you can check about it. You can do it and write me an email, you're wrong or you're right. I'm presuming I know what will be the answers for those who take it seriously and start to do it. Listen and repeat. Now, if you love and enjoy listening to audiobooks, that's perfect for you. And if not, you can just record some small things that you like to read, if it's a poem or anything, right? And you want to listen to it, but very attentively. What you want to do when you do that kind of practice, if you have someone that can help you practice, if you want to practice, in pairs, that could also be great because you can take a book and then you can switch parts. Now you want to listen carefully to what's being read and be able to repeat two things. One is the general concept, preferably concepts, when you get to a long enough reading part, right? If it's a whole page or something like that, or a whole paragraph or two paragraphs. And you want to be able to repeat specific details, 1, 2, or 3 specific details that you can repeat. Of course, if you can do more, the better. So listening and then repeating. It's not like listening to a book for enjoyment and for learning. It's listening in order to actively work the brain out, okay? You want to do a workout for your brain. You want to be very attentive and be able to repeat. The more, the better. So that's what you do when you listen and repeat. Another type of practice that you can do is work on your focus flexibility. That's working exactly on our front brain, on the oxygenation that we talked about before. And the way you do that is that you pick an object, any object you want, okay? And you just place it in front of you. And then you can choose the amount of time. I usually say that you should do 3 minutes hyperfocus and then 2 minutes kind of open focus. I'll explain in a minute exactly how, but you can do more if you feel that it's good for you, if it works for you, if you're able to do it, the shifting. So you take that object and you put it in front of you. And for 3 minutes straight, you look at it and only at it. You do your best to disengage from anything else. That's the only thing that's in your mind, the only thing that's on your brain, the only thing that your brain sees, captures. If you're really, really good at it, literally the background disappears. It's the only thing you see. Okay, it takes time to get to that level, but you want to be hyper-focused and only on that. Nothing can budge you. And after 3 minutes, hopefully you're not all that deep that your clock rams out and you hear it, right? And then you release. You keep your gaze on that object, but it's only gazing. You're just staring at it and allowing your vision to open. You can sometimes move your eyes, but preferably you're still watching, looking, gazing at that object, but you're already open to other things. You're open to the visions. You do not go to them. If something intrudes your thoughts, you don't go after that. You're still remembering that you're here, okay? But you're not hyper-focused. You can still see the surroundings. You can hear noises. So that's kind of being in open focus. You're still focused on what you have at hand, on that object, but you're more open to your surrounding, okay? So you do 3 minutes hyper-focus, 2 minutes releasing. Now, if you find out that one of the two is easier for you, you can switch. If you're very easily hyper-focusing, but it's hard to open focus, work more on open focus. If it's vice versa, work more on hyper-focus. And eventually see how you can do them quite flexibly. The next step will be switching in between. Hyper-focus, open focus. Then again, hyper-focus, again, open focus, and see how quickly can I do it. Totally counter. Another wonderful thing that's been studied through Alzheimer, right? For the Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And they found out that not only can it help for people that have it to slow down the progression, okay, it doesn't heal it, we know it, but to slow down the progression, but also people that just train it can become better at remembering, right? And in general functioning. So what do? You just take a manual polycounter, okay? And you open yourself to the space around you, which probably has lots of objects in it, right? And you pick, let's say, 30 seconds at the beginning. You can go up to 1 minute. And if you really want to, up to 90 seconds. And you start counting objects. Now, there are several things that you do that activate the brain when you do it. First thing first, you click on the counter, each and every object that you count. You also need to point at each and every one of the objects that you're counting. And you need to name it out loud. And then you need to do all that as fast as possible, so you can do more objects in less time. And when you start that thing, you'll probably find yourself looking for names of objects that you're looking at, right? And eventually you want to get to the point where there's no ums, there's no nothing. You just go like drumsticks, screen, phone, duct tape, flour, scissors, hard drive, earphones, etc., etc., etc. Just count and say, and point. Okay? So that's a great exercise that activates both motion, both naming, counting, right? So it has motor and memory and everything involved, and stress control, because you got to do it as fast as you can and eliminate ums. Drumsticks. I love drumsticks. If everybody here drums, so maybe they know those kind of things. And if they don't, so you can get to know it now. Of course, I've got my personal drumsticks here, okay? So what you want to do is you want to see how you practice left-right gameplay. That will mean, for example, the most basic practice, and you can do it with pens or anything, right? You don't really need drumsticks, right? You can take chopsticks and do it the same thing, right? Because what's important is how you work the two parts of your brain in between them, right? Motorly and memory together, okay? Functioning, coordinating. What you want to do to begin with, right, is go one time on the left, one time on the right, and then 2 times on the left. So it's, for example, left, right, left, left, and then vice versa. Right, left, right, right, and then left, right, left, left, okay? But then that's the easy part. Then you do 2 things. One, you start scrambling, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, right, left. Okay, without thinking beforehand, that's what I'm going to do. You just switch between them on the flow. And you try to do it, you do your best to do it as fast as possible. Those 2 things together, usually, at least at the beginning, create confusion. And the more you are confused and you're working on it and you're getting better at it, the better you work, the better the brain creates interconnections. Again, it's all about the density and how complex and challenging we are doing things, okay? You can go forward and do left, both, right, left, right. I'll say it again if you want to try it at home, right? So you go left, both, right, left, right. And again, then you switch. And again, you go random and fast. Okay, so these are 2 basic exercises that you can take with you, and you can do it, like I said, with chopsticks, with pencils, with pens, anything that you've got expendable that you can use, right, which is in your reach. And that's another great way to train. When we talk about speech, maybe you've noticed what I did the whole way through here in the talk. Maybe once or twice, and intentionally, I use the word try or don't, okay? Other than that, I don't use this kind of words because our speech creates images like we saw with the camel. Remember the camel and the chair and the blue hat, right, and the hookah? So just like that camel, okay, when we speak, although we create words, we transmit images, okay? So what we say is important. Now, it has a lot to do with mastery of language and with a mindset, but the brain works the same way. Like I said, there are 2 specific areas in the brain, Wernicke area and Broick area, that has to do with creating speech and understanding speech. And on the other side, depends in each brain, some has it reversed, which works perfectly well. On the other side, there's how you understand it. So, for example, I can say, yeah, what's up? And if you only have a left side, you'll only hear the fact. You won't hear the intuition, okay? You won't hear the intonation. You won't hear my, let's say, maybe interesting tone or the feelings that I put into the words. You'll only get what I said. If it's the other way around, you'll only hear the feelings, the intonation, but you don't know what I said. You know what I mean. Generally, you get the feeling of it, you get the vibe of it, okay? But you don't really understand what I'm saying. That's the way the brain works. So when we think about what we say, again, it takes practice. But when we practice, okay, I will not use, notice, I will not use, okay, don't. I'll find another way to use this word. Instead of don't do this, do that. For example, you can tell, you probably know that, or you've had that sometime before. And if not, I'm glad to share. With little kids, right? You have this little kid, really small child, and you tell him, don't throw it on the floor. Not even a split of a second goes by before he throws it on the floor, right? Probably you've experienced that. And that's because children haven't fully understood and developed the don't part, which is a very cognitive part. It's not an intuition part, right? So by avoiding it, instead of saying, don't throw it on the floor, you can tell him, put it on the table. And all of a sudden, you see that he puts it on the table, okay? So what we say and how we say it is very important. So work on your speech, okay? Avoid as much as you can using don't and use do's, right? And don't try to do anything, just do it. Okay, these are two examples. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't know them, but these are things that you can use and actually influence the way our brain is interconnected. It changes pathways in our brain. Now, those things that I'm going to say now, these three last mentions, are a bit, takes more, obviously, okay? Language learning, truly learning a language, okay, a foreign language for you, is probably the best thing you can do for your brain. So if you ever learned or wished to learn something, that's probably what you want to do, to immerse yourself with learning a language. Now, I'm not talking about tourist learning a language, not being able to buy an ice cream on the street. I'm talking about being able to attend university classes, okay? That's where you want to go. That's where you're aiming when you're immersing yourself in language learning, whatever language it is. Because when you go that high and that complex, each and every one of us knows, even in our native language, right? Even if we speak English or Hebrew or anyone that has their own language, right? At some point, we see that there are words that maybe we don't use or we don't really know what they are. Even if we're proficient with the language, we can learn, we can go to the university, right? We can study, we can do everything. And yet there are some words that we're still not proficient enough and we don't really know how or where to use them. Sometimes, right? To some extent. So think about a foreign language. If you go to that level, and a foreign language, the amount of connections you create within your brain and the complexity is unfathomable. So that's probably one of the best things that you could do if you're interested, which is why it's a bit more complex, because people don't always want to learn languages. But if there's a language that you've ever thought about learning and it's thought about how can I peak perform, that's probably a great way to do it. You will change a lot of things in your brain just by learning, really learning a new language. Complex and diverse problem solving goes back to what I said about Sudoku, if you remember, okay? You don't want to do the same puzzle again and again. You want to switch between them, right? So go for a crosswords, and then go for Sudoku, and then go for a jigsaw puzzle, anything like that, but switch between them. Don't do the same thing again and again and again. Look, I said don't, right? But what do? You switch between them, okay? You go from one for several months to the other for several months to the third, and to the fourth, and then maybe come back to one of them. Now, of course, you can do more. Sometimes people enjoy more one thing or the other, right? So you don't quit your hobbies, right? If it's your hobby, go for it. But as much as you can, see how you can diverse your problem-solving gains or free time or hobbies, okay? Be involved in that. And meditation. The reason I put meditation here, although it's kind of complex, is because meditation is wonderful for alpha peak. One of the best ways to train alpha peak is to practice meditation, okay? I'm talking about there are so many types of meditation. So I'm talking about the specific sitting still and contemplating and imagining, okay? That's the kind of meditation I'm talking about. Breath work and contemplating and being imaginative, right? That's the kind of meditation I'm talking about that creates and enhances alpha peak, which, as we talked about, is very important to achieve that peak brain performance, okay? So those are just some, but quite a lot, I think, things that you can do in order to actually enhance your brain. Now, I just want to mention HeartMath, Muse, and Reflect. These are already external companies, okay? Sometimes I refer people to them. I don't work with them directly. I work with their products, but I don't work with them directly. So I can't give you a discount or something like that. It has nothing to do with me. But these are notable mentions because they're easy to use. You can find them online, and you can, if you're interested, you can use them. They're very easy to use. They're very straightforward, and they enhance what you're doing. HeartMath have breathwork. They have breathwork apps and hardware. Muse goes for brain training more. Okay, they have relaxations and meditation. It's a band that you can put on your forehead, right? And Reflect is kind of a ball that you hold. It measures your biosignals and helps you again with breath work and temperature and all those kind of things. So these are some things that are simple, which is why I mentioned them. Okay, they can help, they can facilitate home training of the brain and what we've talked about. So I'll just sum it up, okay, for you to know. So why should you train your brain? We said the whys and whats, right? So the brain is similar to our muscles in the sense that better using our brain and training it helps improve all aspects of our functioning, which immediately correlates to actual life performance, focus, creativity, flexibility, problem solving, decision making, all of those things that are important online when we're in our working space, when we want to sell a product, when we want to do anything actually, right? We want to give a presentation, we want to do anything that we want to do. These things correlate immediately to the way we perform. So the more we do it, the more we train the brain, the better we can do other things, right? And why? So first of all, or what we should do. So all the things that we've seen, which are the whats, right? Give various aspects of the brain the workout they need, okay? And like we said, pattern recognition, listening, thinking, duality with the drums, right? The clicker, the tally. So all of those things, this is what we want to train. And how is what we've seen before. And if there are any questions or anything, I think now is the great time. And after that, you can also speak to Zach and be able to give you how to reach out with me if you need.
Well, awesome conversation. My synapses are firing on overdrive today, Mr. Chenman. I have a couple of questions from the chat, one from our friend Nir. How can I become a peak performer at something I do not like or think I'm not good at, such as sales or public speaking?
So first of all, it's a wonderful question. Thank you, Nir. And first of all, the important thing is to understand that when I'm talking about the Brainset of peak performance, I'm talking about enhancing everything we do. Now, if we're talking about sales specifically, okay, let's talk about sales for a minute there, okay? Language, listening to details that we've talked about, right? Open focus. Those are skills that are specifically useful to that point. Now, if there's something that you don't like, the first thing you want to do is add the word yet. We talked about speech, about language at the end, okay? If you want to be better at it, first start with I don't like it yet, because then you open your brain to understanding that you're going to like it anytime soon. Okay, it's going to happen. You're going to like it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, the other thing about it is just starting the other trainings, because like I said, the more you get to the balance in the peak performer brain, it goes vice versa. It's not that you're liking or not liking something. You're just performing your best. It's like saying that's already kind of a mindset, but it's like teaching the brain to work in the state that says, I'm already here, so I'm going to do the best of it. Okay, so whether you like it or not, what you can do is, first of all, add the word yet, so that you'll open your brain to liking it, or to at least being okay with it, and start whole brain training in order to actually get to the point where it doesn't matter if you like it or not. You're just doing it, and you do it in the best way. Hope it answers the question.
Awesome. I have another question sent to me. What are some things that will take you out of the zone or the peak performance flow states that you were mentioning?
Things that would take you out of it when you're already on it? Well, depending on how well you are in being in the zone, okay, and how comfortable you are in being in the zone, that it differs. Because someone who's kind of, let's say, is a beginner, okay, just getting to know how to get into the zone, then probably even noises could take him out of the zone. Okay, even being in a noisy environment could take him out of the zone. And if you're talking about someone who's much better at it, probably it'll take something, like I said, something really dramatic, a big thing that needs your attention that would take you out. So the event that could take you out of the zone depends on how well you are in performing and getting into the zone. Could be something very minor, can be something very major.
Awesome, and we got one more question here. Speaking about the zone, about these activation alpha levels you mentioned, meditation, etc. How do you know when you've activated these frequencies?
So first thing first, it's a cheat sheet. When you close your eyes, you're activating alpha. That's the easiest way, okay? Unless there's something specific with your brain, in which case you probably want to check it out. And that's for that kind of things you already want either to use, like I said, MUs, but in some kind of a better constellation, or come to a clinic where you can actually, someone can see your brain's activity. But basically, most people automatically, when we close our eyes, because so much information is cut off, alpha goes up. So just by sitting down and closing our eyes, we're already enhancing alpha. Now, once we get to the point where we're really getting into the peak alpha performance, we can notice it. It's hard to explain in words, but things shift in your body, okay? You'll notice if you're attentive enough, your breathing changes, your feeling changes, you notice things. It's called neuroception. You can actually notice your sweat, your blood pressure, okay? Your muscle tension, okay? Something that's similar to, if you know, mindfulness, right? So you become automatically mindful and you become automatically calmer. So it's something that you feel. You can actually sense that you're there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the illuminating conversation today, Mr. Chenman. If you want to leave your email in the chat for anybody that wants to reach out to you about anything regarding peak brain performance, go ahead and do that. Everybody in the chat, thank you for joining us today. This webinar will be recorded alongside all of our other webinars. If you are looking forward to more of these conversations, May 5th, we are going to have Chris Tam join us for a conversation regarding a deep dive into AI, chat, GPT, everything automation. So we appreciate you all taking the time today. Once again, thanks, Mr. Chenman, for going out of your way to share some insights today about brain performance. We appreciate you, and thank you for being a part of our community.
Thank you, Zach, Nir, Dave, and everybody for being here, for allowing me to have this platform, and hopefully you've learned something. I know I've enjoyed it. I started excited. Now I'm simply enjoying it. And like you said, if anybody has anything they want to reach out, feel free to throw me a mail. I'll be glad to help and answer questions, etc. Thank you very much, all of you. Really, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.